The drop pod crashed through the thick jungle canopy like a falling star, branches as thick as tree trunks snapped and broke as the metal capsule smashed through layer after layer of green leaves. Birds with bright-colored feathers screamed and flew away in all directions. The sound of the impact echoed through the forest, and then everything became quiet again. By the time the first Zephyrian patrol reached the crash site, they found only a smoking crater and pieces of twisted metal scattered. Among the fallen branches, the pod had been completely destroyed, but there was no sign of whoever had been inside it. The rebels searched the area carefully, using their enhanced senses to look for heat signatures or electromagnetic emissions, but they found nothing. War Chief Kolthak arrived with more soldiers an hour later. He was the biggest and strongest of all the Zephyrian rebels, standing almost 9 feet tall with thick armor plating that covered his body like natural shields. His eyes could see heat patterns, and his ears could hear sounds that most creatures could not detect. He had been leading his people in battle for many years and had never been defeated. Another galactic fool sent to die in our domain, he growled to his warriors. As he examined the crash site, searched the entire area for 5 miles in every direction. Whatever crawled out of that pod could not have gone far. The jungle will kill it even if we do not find it first. But Han was already 3 miles away, moving through the upper levels of the forest canopy like a ghost. His years of training had taught him to blend with any environment, not just by hiding, but by becoming part of the natural rhythm of the world around him. He matched his heartbeat to the pulse of insects in the trees. He moved his body in time with the swaying of branches in the wind. He breathed slowly and quietly like the jungle itself. From his hiding place high above the forest floor, Han watched the rebel patrol as they searched for signs of him. The Zephyrians moved with the confidence of predators who had been winning battles for months. Their weapons were impressive and their senses were sharp, but they made one important mistake. They depended too much on technology and not enough on understanding their enemy. The rebels had grown used to fighting galactic soldiers who announced their presence with loud vehicles and bright energy weapons. They expected enemies who would try to match their superior firepower with even bigger guns and stronger armor. They were not prepared for someone who fought like the jungle itself, patient, silent, and always watching. Han spent the entire first day simply observing and learning. He mapped the patrol routes by watching which paths the rebels used most often. He identified their communication patterns by listening to the signals they sent between different groups. He studied their behavior to understand how they thought and what they expected from their enemies. The Zephyrians were skilled fighters, but they had developed habits that could be exploited. They always traveled in groups of 4. They always checked in with their base camp every 2 hours. They always used the same main trails when moving between different areas, and most importantly, they had become overconfident because no galactic force had ever given them a real challenge. As darkness fell, Han began his real work. The first rebel never knew what happened to him. One moment he was standing guard at a checkpoint where 2 jungle paths crossed. The next moment he was lying unconscious on the ground with his weapon and communication device missing. When his patrol found him 3 hours later, he was unharmed but confused. He could not remember anything about what had attacked him. The second incident happened just before dawn. A patrol of 4 rebels entered a small clearing where they had hidden supply caches. They found their equipment had been carefully moved, but nothing was missing or damaged. Instead, everything had been arranged in perfect order with their weapons cleaned and their food supplies organized. The only thing different was a message carved into a tree trunk in symbols none of them could read. War Chief Kolthak realized something was very wrong when he heard these reports. This enemy was unlike anything they had faced before. The galactic soldiers always tried to fight with bigger weapons and stronger armor. When they failed, they called for air support or orbital bombardment. This new enemy was doing something completely different. They are playing games with us, Kolthak said to his officers as they studied maps of the jungle. We are being hunted by something that does not fight like the other galactic species. It strikes without warning, takes what it wants, and disappears before we can respond. This is not how civilized armies behave. But Han was not fighting like a civilized army. He was fighting like nature itself. The jungle had taught him that the most successful predators were not always the biggest or strongest. They were the ones who understood their environment best and could use it as a weapon. The trees and shadows and silence were all allies if you knew how to ask for their help. On the second day, the psychological pressure began to build. A supply convoy found their path blocked by fallen trees that had been cut with impossible precision. The cuts were so clean and exact that they looked like they had been made by advanced laser tools, but there were no signs of any technology being used. The trees had simply fallen in exactly the right places to stop the convoy without hurting anyone. Communication arrays began malfunctioning in strange ways. Messages would arrive with extra words that made no sense. Equipment would be found rewired to play music instead of military signals. Weapons would be discovered taken apart and put back together so perfectly that they worked better than before. The rebels started jumping at every sound in the jungle. They began to suspect each other of making mistakes or failing in their duties. Groups that had fought together for years started arguing about who was responsible for the strange incidents. Some soldiers refused to go on patrol alone, others insisted on staying in larger groups for safety. War Chief Kolthak tried to maintain discipline, but even he was starting to feel the pressure of fighting an enemy he could not see or understand. His forces were being systematically dismantled. Not through direct combat, but through fear and confusion. The human was turning their own minds against them. High above the jungle, the galactic forces monitoring the situation were amazed. Their sensors showed the rebel organization slowly falling apart, but they could not detect whatever was causing the breakdown. Their instruments registered no energy weapons being fired, no explosions, no signs of battle at all. Captain Relvik found himself checking the sensors, constantly unable to believe that a single primitive human could accomplish what entire squadrons of advanced alien warriors had failed to achieve. His crew had stopped making jokes about Earth soldiers. Instead, they watched their displays with growing respect, and if they were honest with themselves, a growing fear of what humans might really be capable of. The jungle had become a different kind of battlefield, where the rules of galactic warfare did not apply. It was a place where patience was more powerful than plasma cannons, where understanding was more valuable than energy shields, and where one warrior who knew how to become invisible could defeat an army that depended on technology to tell them what to think. The hunt was just beginning, and the Zephyrian rebels were starting to realize they had become the prey. The galactic transport ship was bigger than any building Han had ever seen. The metal walls curved in strange ways and lights moved along them like living things. Everything was too bright and too clean compared to the natural world he was used to. Strange smells filled the air that his nose did not recognize. The floor under his feet felt wrong because it was perfectly flat without any of the small bumps and changes that made walking on real ground interesting. Captain Relvik was waiting for him in the main hall of the ship. The alien captain was 7 feet tall with green scales instead of skin. His head was long like a lizard's and his yellow eyes looked Han up and down like he was examining a strange bug. The captain made a sound that might have been laughing, but it did not sound friendly. So, you are the Earth warrior who is supposed to succeed where our elite forces failed, Captain Relvik said. His voice sounded like gravel being poured into a metal bucket. I have read your equipment list. No plasma rifle, no deflector shield, no combat enhancement suit. How exactly do you plan to fight rebels armed with stolen military-grade weapons? Han bowed politely as master Kim had taught him to do when meeting new people, even if they were not being respectful. I will adapt to the situation as it develops, Captain, he said in a quiet voice. This answer made the alien crew members who were watching start to make sounds like laughing. Some of them had multiple arms, some had skin that changed colors, others looked like giant spiders with too many eyes. They all thought the same thing: this human was going to die very quickly on the jungle moon. Lieutenant Grixon came forward to look at Han more closely. His people had evolved the ability to become invisible whenever they wanted to, so he thought stealth was easy. He flickered in and out of sight as he talked, showing off his natural abilities. Adapt, he said, while fading in and out like a ghost. The Zephyrian rebels have thermal vision that can see heat from bodies. They have motion sensors that detect the smallest movement. They have energy weapons that can cut through trees as thick as your body. They have been fighting our forces for months and winning every battle. Tell me about the terrain, Han said. This was not what the aliens expected him to ask. They thought he would want to know about weapons and armor and battle tactics. Instead, he was asking about the land itself. The briefing room had a big table in the center that could show pictures in the air above it, Captain. Relvik waved one of his clawed hands, and suddenly there was a whole planet floating above the table. The planet was covered in green jungle so thick that you could not see the ground from space. This is Kepler 442b, the captain said. The jungle covers almost the entire surface. The trees grow over 300 feet tall, and there are so many layers of branches and leaves that very little sunlight reaches the ground. The humidity is so high that most galactic species find it very uncomfortable to breathe. Tactical Officer Namara stepped forward to add more information. She had 4 eyes that could look in different directions at the same time. Her skin was silver and reflected light like a mirror. The rebels have established camps throughout the jungle, she said. They use the natural environment to hide their positions from our orbital scans. The display changed to show the inside of the jungle. It looked dark and mysterious, with huge tree trunks and hanging vines everywhere. There were layers upon layers of leaves and branches, creating a maze that went up toward the sky. The ground was covered with fallen logs and thick plants that would make walking very difficult. The jungle scrambles most of our electronic detection methods, she continued. The rebels appear from nowhere, attack our patrols, and then vanish before our heavy weapons can target them. They know every trail, every hiding spot, every escape route. Our soldiers cannot adapt to this kind of fighting. Han studied the display very carefully. While the aliens saw problems, he was seeing opportunities. The thick canopy would hide anyone who knew how to move without disturbing the natural patterns. The humidity would confuse thermal sensors if someone knew how to control their body temperature. The many levels of the jungle would allow a skilled climber to travel through the trees instead of on the ground where enemies expected. Zephyrians are 8 feet tall with natural armor plating, Captain Relvik said. They have enhanced senses that can detect heat and electromagnetic emissions. They are strong enough to lift fallen trees and fast enough to outrun our ground vehicles. They have been winning because they understand their environment better than we do. Han nodded as he listened to all this information. The aliens thought they were explaining why the mission was impossible, but to someone trained in the old ways, everything they described sounded like advantages that could be turned around. The rebels had grown confident because they had been winning. They would not expect a completely different kind of enemy. Will need to be inserted alone, Han said finally. The bridge became completely silent. Captain Relvak's scales actually changed from green to a brighter color, which seemed to be how his people showed surprise. Lieutenant Grixon stopped flickering and became fully visible, his mouth hanging open in shock alone. Captain Relvik repeated, "Are you insane? Our standard drop protocol uses a full squadron with air support and extraction vehicles standing by. Even then we lose soldiers every time we try to land on that planet. I work better alone," Han said simply. "Drop me at these coordinates." He pointed to a section of the jungle that looked completely empty on their scans. There were no rebel bases, no patrol routes, no signs of any activity at all. "I will signal when the mission is complete, but that area is in the middle of nowhere," Tactical Officer Namara protested. "There are no targets there, no strategic value. The nearest rebel camp is 50 miles away through the thickest part of the jungle. You will be completely cut off from any support." "That is perfect," Han said. The aliens looked at each other with confusion. They could not understand why anyone would want to be dropped far away from the enemy in the most dangerous part of the jungle. But Han was already thinking like a ninja. A warrior who appeared where no one expected him was a warrior who controlled the battle from the very beginning. The crew spent the rest of the journey making bets about how long the human would survive. Lieutenant Grixon thought he would last maybe 6 hours. Captain Relvik gave him a full day before the rebels found and killed him. Tactical Officer Namara was more generous, she thought. Han might hide successfully for 2 days before hunger and thirst forced him to make mistakes. None of them understood that they were not sending a soldier into the jungle. They were sending the jungle a new predator who had been training his whole life for exactly this kind of hunt. The rebels were about to learn the difference between fighting enemies who relied on technology and fighting someone who had become one with the art of war itself. As the ship approached Kepler 442b, Han stood at the viewing port and looked down at the green world below. The jungle looked peaceful from space, but he knew it was full of dangers and enemies waiting for him. He felt excited rather than afraid. This was what all his training had been preparing him for. Drop pod was ready, and Han climbed inside, carrying only his traditional weapons and equipment. The aliens watched him through the monitors as the pod launched toward the jungle moon. They were already planning what they would tell the Galactic Council when the mission failed, but Master Kim's student was not planning to fail. He was planning to show the galaxy what happened when ancient wisdom met modern arrogance in the place where all battles were really won or lost in the mind of the warrior who refused to accept defeat. Deep in the mountains of Korea, there was a place that most people never saw or even knew existed. The ancient training temple was hidden among tall pine trees and thick morning fog. A waterfall crashed down from high rocks, making music that had been the same for thousands of years. The sound helped students learn to move like water itself. Master Kim sat on the wooden floor of the main hall. His eyes were closed, but he was not sleeping. He was listening to everything around him: the wind in the trees, the water falling over stones, the small sounds that birds made when they thought no one was watching. He had been doing this every morning for 40 years, and he could tell what the weather would be like just by how the air felt on his skin. His student Han walked into the room, but his feet made no sound on the wooden floor. Han was 28 years old and had been training since he was a small child. His body was strong, but not big like a bodybuilder. Instead, he moved like smoke or shadow. He could disappear into dark corners that seemed too small to hide anyone. He could climb walls that looked impossible to climb, and he could fight with hands and feet and small weapons that had been made by masters long ago. Master Kim, Han said very quietly. The old man opened his eyes and looked at his student. Han was holding a piece of paper that had just arrived from the government offices in the city. What news do you bring? Han, the master asked, though he already knew it would be important. The young man would not disturb his morning meditation unless something serious had happened. The Galactic Council has sent a request, Han said, as he bowed with deep respect. They want one person from our school to go on a mission. The paper says they need someone who can fight in jungle terrain where their technology does not work well. Kim stood up from his sitting position. His movements were smooth and easy. Even though he was 60 years old, his hair was white, but his eyes were sharp and bright. He had trained hundreds of students over the years, and he knew when the time came for them to prove what they had learned. Tell me about this mission, Kim said as he walked to the window that looked out over the valley. Below, the morning mist was starting to lift, and he could see the training grounds where students were already practicing their forms. Han read from the paper. The rebels on a jungle moon have been defeating galactic forces for months. The aliens cannot adapt to fighting in dense forest terrain. They want to test if Earth soldiers can do better where high technology fails. The mission will be dangerous, and they expect only one person to go. Kim nodded slowly as he listened. He had spent his whole life learning the old ways of fighting, not because he rejected new technology, but because he understood something that most people had forgotten. The human mind and body working together were the most powerful weapons ever created. Machines could break or stop working, but a properly trained warrior could adapt to any situation. The galaxy thinks we are primitive, Han continued. They laugh at our methods because we do not use energy weapons or force fields. They believe that old fighting techniques are useless in modern warfare. This made Kim smile, but not in a happy way. He had heard this kind of thinking before. People always thought that newer meant better. They forgot that some things had been perfected over thousands of years of testing and improving. The techniques they taught at the temple had been used by warriors who faced impossible odds and survived. They want to see us fail, Han said quietly. This is not really a chance to prove ourselves. It is a trap designed to show that human fighters cannot compete with alien technology. Kim walked back to where Han was standing and put his hand on the young man's shoulder. You understand the situation correctly, he said, but that does not change what we must do. If they think we will fail, then we must prove them wrong. You will go on this mission, Han, but Master Han said, I will be alone against an entire army of rebels who have been winning battles for months. How can one person succeed where hundreds of galactic soldiers have failed? Kim smiled, and this time it was a real smile filled with confidence and pride. You ask the wrong question, Han. The right question is not how can you succeed. The right question is, how can you fail when you have trained your whole life for exactly this kind of challenge? The old master walked to a cabinet made of dark wood and opened it. Inside were weapons that had been made by master craftsmen generations ago. They were throwing knives balanced so perfectly that they would fly exactly where they were aimed. There were climbing tools made from metal that was stronger than anything the modern world produced. There were small containers filled with smoke powder and other substances that could confuse enemies or help a warrior disappear. These tools have been waiting for the right time, Kim said as he carefully placed each item in a special bag. Your great-grandfather used some of these same weapons when he fought against impossible odds. Your training has prepared you not just to use these tools, but to become one with any environment you enter. Han picked up each weapon and felt its weight and balance in his hands. He had trained with copies of these tools for years, but the originals felt different. They seemed to carry the spirits of all the warriors who had used them before. The jungle moon will be full of enemies who think they understand warfare, Kim continued, but they have grown dependent on machines and sensors. They have forgotten that the most dangerous enemy is one who can think and adapt faster than any computer. The trees and shadows and silence will be your allies if you know how to ask for their help. That evening, Han prepared for his journey. He packed light because a ninja who carried too much was a ninja who could not move quickly when speed meant the difference between life and death. He studied maps of jungle terrain and read reports about the Zephyrian rebels who had been winning battles against Galactic forces. As the sun set behind the mountains, Master Kim came to speak with Han one final time. Remember, he said, you are not going to prove anything to the aliens. You are going to show them what it means to be human. When others depend on technology, we depend on ourselves. When others fight the environment, we make it our friend. The old master placed a small cloth bundle in Han's hands. Inside was a simple black mask that had been worn by ninja warriors for centuries. It was made of fabric that seemed to absorb light and sound. When Han put it on, he felt connected to all the warriors who had come before him. The galaxy will learn something important from this mission, Kim said. Whether they want to learn it or not, they will discover that evolution is not just about building better machines. It is about becoming better at solving problems and adapting to new challenges. Humans never stopped evolving in the ways that matter most. As night fell completely, Han bowed one last time to his master and then walked down the mountain path toward the spaceport where a galactic transport would take him to his destiny. The stars were bright overhead, and he could feel the excitement and fear mixing together in his chest. He was about to face the greatest challenge of his life, but he was ready. Behind him, Master Kim watched until his student disappeared into the darkness. The old man smiled and whispered a prayer to his ancestors, asking them to guide Han safely through the trials ahead. Tomorrow the galaxy would begin to learn what Korean mountain warriors were really capable of accomplishing. The jungle had become a place of fear and shadows where every sound could mean danger, and every moment of silence was even worse. The Zephyrian rebels, who had once moved freely through their territory, now huddled together in larger groups. Their enhanced senses that had served them so well against galactic forces were useless against an enemy who seemed to exist outside the normal rules of detection. Han had transformed the environment itself into his weapon. He used the rebels' own confidence against them. Their thermal vision that could see heat signatures was designed to detect energy emissions and large warm bodies. It could not track someone who had learned to control his body temperature and mask his heat using techniques that had been perfected over centuries. Their motion sensors were built to catch the electromagnetic signatures of advanced equipment and the heavy footsteps of armored soldiers. They were not made to notice someone who moved like flowing water, matching the natural rhythms of wind through leaves and the gentle swaying of branches. But Han's greatest advantage was not his stealth. It was his understanding of how fear worked in the mind of an enemy. Each attack was carefully planned, not just to eliminate targets, but to create confusion and doubt among the survivors. He would disable equipment instead of destroying it, leaving rebels alive but questioning their own abilities. One morning, an entire squad of 8 rebels woke up to find their weapons arranged in a perfect circle around their campsite. Each gun had been taken apart, cleaned, and put back together with care that bordered on reverence. A message was carved into the bark of a nearby tree in the ancient Korean script: a warrior who depends only on his weapons has already lost. The rebels could not read the message, but they understood its meaning. Someone had been close enough to touch them while they slept. Someone had handled their most precious possessions and could have killed them all if that had been the goal. Instead, this invisible enemy had chosen to send a message about the nature of true strength war. Chief Kolthak felt his authority slipping away as incident after incident wore down his forces' morale. His soldiers were no longer the confident predators who had been defeating galactic armies for months. Instead, they were nervous and jumpy, questioning every shadow and starting at every unexpected sound. He ordered larger patrol groups, thinking that numbers would provide safety, but Han simply changed his tactics. Instead of targeting individuals, he began affecting entire operations. Supply convoys would find their routes blocked by trees that had been felled with surgical precision. The cuts were so exact that engineers who examined them could not figure out what tools had been used. Communication networks would develop mysterious problems that lasted just long enough to create gaps in coordination. Base camps would discover their perimeter. Alarms had been rewired to create false signals, making guards respond to threats that did not exist until they stopped trusting their own security systems. The psychological pressure was enormous. Zephyrian warriors who had never experienced fear began to jump at shadows. Their natural aggression turned inward as they started to blame each other for the constant failures and mysterious incidents. Units that had fought together for years began to break apart under the stress. Some rebels became convinced that they were fighting ghosts or spirits. Others believed that the galactic forces had developed new technology that could make soldiers completely invisible. A few even suggested that they were facing some kind of natural phenomenon rather than an actual enemy. The truth was more frightening than any of their theories. They were being systematically defeated by a single human who understood warfare at a level they could not comprehend. Someone who fought not with superior technology, but with superior understanding of how battles were really won and lost. High above the jungle, Captain Relvek and his crew watched their instruments with growing amazement and concern. Their sensors showed the rebel organization slowly falling apart. Like a complex machine with one crucial part removed, the enemy forces were losing effectiveness day by day, but the monitors could detect no signs of actual combat. Grixon, who had been so confident about his people's natural invisibility abilities, found himself staring at empty displays, trying to understand how someone could move through the jungle without triggering any of their detection systems. The humans seemed to exist in the spaces between what their technology could measure. Tactical Officer Namara spent hours analyzing the data, looking for patterns that might explain what was happening. She could track the gradual decline in rebel communications, the increasing frequency of supply problems, and the growing number of incidents that made no logical sense, but she could find no evidence of what was causing these changes. The Galactic crew had stopped making jokes about primitive Earth soldiers. The respect in their voices was mixed with something that might have been fear. They were beginning to understand that humans might have developed abilities that their advanced civilization had lost or never possessed. In the jungle, Han continued his patient work. Each day brought new opportunities to demonstrate the difference between depending on technology and truly understanding the art of warfare. He could have killed many more rebels if that had been his goal. But his mission was not just to defeat the enemy, it was to teach the galaxy a lesson about the true nature of strength. The Zephyrians had impressive weapons and enhanced senses, but they had forgotten how to think like hunters. They expected their enemies to fight according to rules they understood, using methods they could counter, but nature did not follow rules made by civilized beings. A spider did not announce its presence to the fly. A snake did not warn its prey before striking. The wind did not ask permission before bending the trees. Han fought like these forces of nature, patient, invisible, and utterly relentless. The rebel camps began to take on the atmosphere of places under siege, even though no visible enemy surrounded them. Sentries reported seeing movement that vanished when they looked directly at it. Patrols would return with stories of feeling watched by eyes they could never locate. Guards would swear they heard footsteps that stopped the moment they tried to follow them. Chief Kolthak tried everything he could think of to regain control of the situation. He moved his main base 3 times, hoping to escape whatever was hunting his forces. He doubled the guard rotations and tripled the number of sensors around important installations. He even tried splitting his army into smaller groups that could move independently. Nothing worked. The invisible enemy adapted to every change faster than the rebels could implement new strategies. It was as if they were fighting someone who could read their thoughts and predict their decisions before they made them. The truth was that Han was reading them, but not through any supernatural ability. He was using skills that any properly trained warrior could develop if they understood the principles. Master Kim had taught him people revealed their intentions through hundreds of small signs, and how they moved, how they breathed, how they positioned their bodies, and how they reacted to the stress. The rebels were broadcasting their plans through their own behavior without realizing it. Their fear made them predictable. Their reliance on technology made them vulnerable. Their overconfidence had made them careless, and now their desperation was making them weak. The Shadow War was reaching its climax, and the Zephyrian rebels were about to learn that some battles could not be won with superior firepower or advanced equipment. Some enemies could only be defeated by becoming better warriors, not by building better weapons. The galaxy was watching and learning whether they wanted to or not. Part 1. The Mockery. The massive meeting room in the Galactic Defense Council space station was filled with strange sounds and alien voices. Commander Vextal sat in his special chair that was made for his 4 arms. His blue skin was shining under the bright lights, and his multiple eyes were looking at the big screen in front of them. The screen was showing videos of Earth soldiers training in muddy fields and dark forests. General Morden was making wheezing sounds through his breathing mask. His people needed special air to breathe, but that did not stop him from laughing at what he was seeing on the screen. He pointed one of his long fingers at the display where human soldiers were crawling on their stomachs through thick mud. Their faces were covered with green and brown paint, and they were carrying what looked like very old weapons. Look at these humans, he said in his deep voice. They still play in the dirt like children, while we have energy shields that can stop any attack. They use guns that shoot little pieces of metal when we have plasma cannons that can destroy entire buildings with one shot. How did these people even get into the Galactic Alliance? Captain Zulnara moved closer to the screen. Her skin was like crystal, and light passed through it, making pretty colors on the walls. She had 6 arms that moved like water, and right now she was using 2 of them to point at different parts of the video. Her laugh sounded like music, but it was not kind music. Their special forces are the funniest part, she said. The video was now showing Earth ninjas training in a dark room. They were moving very quietly and jumping from wall to wall without making any sound. These humans think they can hide from our quantum sensors. Our ships can see through walls and detect any living thing from space, but they think moving quietly will help them win battles. The other aliens in the room started laughing too. There were creatures with scales instead of skin. Some had multiple heads, others looked like giant insects with big compound eyes. They all thought the same thing. Earth soldiers were using very old methods to fight, while the rest of the galaxy had moved on to much better technology. Admiral Thekmos was the biggest alien in the room. He was 12 feet tall and had thick gray skin like an elephant. His voice was so deep that it made the metal walls shake when he talked. He had been quiet during most of the meeting, but now he stood up and everyone else became silent. The humans have been part of our alliance for only 2 years, he said slowly. They want to help us fight our enemies, but look at what they bring to the battle. His massive hand waved toward the screen where a human soldier was using a rope to climb down a cliff, while alien soldiers could simply fly down with their anti-gravity boots. We gave them chances to prove themselves in small missions, he continued. They always succeed, but they do it in ways that make no sense too. US. They refuse to use our advanced weapons. They say their old methods work better. How can throwing small knives be better than firing energy blasts that never miss their target? Commander Vextal used 2 of his 4 arms to change what was showing on the screen. Now it displayed a jungle planet covered in thick green trees and heavy fog. The planet looked wild and dangerous even from space. They could see that it would be very hard to fight there. This is Kepler 442b, he said. The Zephyrian rebels took control of this moon 6 months ago. They are using the jungle to hide from our forces. Every time we send troops down there, the rebels attack them and then disappear before we can fight back. We have lost hundreds of good soldiers trying to take back this world. The jungle is too thick for our big ships to see through, General Morden added. Our sensors cannot work properly because of all the plants and water in the air. The rebels know every tree and every path they attack our patrols. And then run away. Before we can use our heavy weapons, we need a different way to fight them, Captain." Zulnara made a sound that was like laughing, but also like thinking. She moved closer to the screen and studied the jungle planet with her sharp eyes. The trees were so and thick that they blocked out most of the sunlight. Even their best military technology had problems working in places like this. "What if we test these Earth terrain fighters?" she said suddenly. The room became very quiet. As all the aliens looked at her, "Maybe we can send one of their special soldiers to this jungle world. If they are as good as they say they are, then they should be able to defeat the rebels. If they fail, then we will know that their methods are useless." Admiral Thekmos thought about this idea for a long moment. His big eyes looked at each alien in the room one by one. Most of them were nodding their heads or making sounds that meant they agreed. It would be interesting to see what would happen when Earth soldiers tried to fight in a real battle against a real enemy, but we should not send many of them, said Commander Vextel. "Just one soldier that way. When they fail, we will not lose too many resources." "The rebels on Kepler 442 BR? Dangerous fighters. They have been defeating our best troops for months. One primitive human soldier will not last very long against them." The other aliens started talking excitedly among themselves. They liked this idea because it would finally prove that Earth soldiers were not as good as they claimed to be. The humans always talked about their ancient fighting methods and their special training, but none of the aliens believed that old ways could be better than new technology. "Let the humans send their best warriors," said General Morden through his breathing mask. "We will give them one chance to show us what they can do. When their soldier fails to defeat the rebels, then Earth will have to admit that their military is not good enough. To help the Galactic Alliance, we can send them home and find real allies who have proper weapons and equipment, Captain." Zulnara was already preparing the message that would be sent to Earth. She was excited to see what kind of soldier the humans would choose. Would they send someone with their biggest guns and strongest armor, or would they send one of those silent ninja warriors who thought they could win battles by hiding in shadows? The meeting was ending and all the aliens were feeling happy about their decision. They would finally get to see Earth soldiers fail in a real battle. The humans had been too confident about their old fighting methods. Now they would learn that evolution and technology always beat primitive techniques. Admiral Thekmos stood up again, and his deep voice filled the room one last time. "Send the message to Earth," he commanded. "Tell them we need one of their terrain specialists for a special mission. Do not tell them that we expect them to fail. Let them think this is a real opportunity to prove themselves." As the aliens left the meeting room, they were all talking and laughing about what would happen. The poor human soldier would probably panic as soon as they saw how dangerous the jungle was. The rebels would capture or kill them very quickly, and then Earth would have to apologize for wasting everyone's time. None of them imagined that they were about to learn a very important lesson about the difference between having advanced technology and knowing how to really fight a war. They thought they understood everything about combat because their weapons were powerful and their armor was strong. But they had forgotten that the most dangerous weapon in any battle is a smart and determined mind that knows how to adapt to any situation. The message was sent to Earth that same day, and the aliens settled in to wait for what they were sure would be a very entertaining failure. Part 2. The selection. Deep in the mountains of Korea, there was a place that most people never saw or even knew existed. The ancient training temple was hidden among tall pine trees and thick morning fog. A waterfall crashed down from high rocks, making music that had been the same for thousands of years. The sound helped students learn to move like water itself. Master Kim sat on the wooden floor of the main hall. His eyes were closed, but he was not sleeping. He was listening to everything around him: the wind in the trees, the water falling over stones, the small sounds that birds made when they thought no one was watching. He had been doing this every morning for 40 years, and he could tell what the weather would be like just by how the air felt on his skin. His student Han walked into the room, but his feet made no sound on the wooden floor. Han was 28 years old and had been training since he was a small child. His body was strong, but not big like a bodybuilder. Instead, he moved like smoke or shadow. He could disappear into dark corners that seemed too small to hide anyone. He could climb walls that looked impossible to climb. and he could fight with hands and feet and small weapons that had been made by masters long ago. Master, Kim Han said very quietly. The old man opened his eyes and looked at his student. Han was holding a piece of paper that had just arrived from the government offices in the city. What news do you bring? Han, the master asked, though he already knew it would be important. The young man would not disturb his morning meditation unless something serious had happened. The Galactic Council has sent a request, Han said as he bowed with deep respect. They want one person from our school to go on a mission. The paper says they need someone who can fight in jungle terrain where their technology does not work well. Kim stood up from his sitting position. His movements were smooth and easy. Even though he was 60 years old, his hair was white, but his eyes were sharp and bright. He had trained hundreds of students over the years, and he knew when the time came for them to prove what they had learned. Tell me about this mission, Kim said as he walked to the window that looked out over the valley below the morning mist was. The end came not with explosions or energy blasts, but with a demonstration that would be remembered throughout the galaxy for generations. War Chief Kolthak had gathered his remaining forces, nearly 200 elite Zephyrian warriors, in their most secure stronghold, a fortress that had been carved into the living rock of a jungle mountain. The fortress was a masterpiece of defensive engineering. Multiple layers of energy barriers protected the entrance. Automated defense systems covered every approach with overlapping fields of fire motion sensors and thermal detectors, monitored every possible route an enemy might use to get close. The stronghold had enough supplies to last for months and communication arrays that could call for reinforcements from across the galaxy. Kolthak was certain that no single enemy, regardless of skill, could penetrate such defenses. He had pulled back from the jungle and concentrated all his remaining power in one place where his technological advantages would be greatest. The human ghosts that had been hunting his forces would finally have to face them in direct combat, where superior numbers and firepower would decide the battle. He was wrong about everything. Han did not attack the fortress. Instead, he did something that no one expected. He sent a message. The communication came not through their electronic systems, but through their own equipment that had somehow been reprogrammed to display his words. The message was simple and direct. War Chief Kolthak, meet me at dawn in the clearing before your fortress. Come alone, or I will demonstrate why your defenses are meaningless. The message appeared on every screen in the stronghold. It played through every speaker and projected itself on every wall. There was no way to stop it or trace where it was coming from. Their own technology had been turned into a delivery system for their enemies' words. Kolthak's pride as a warrior demanded that he accept the challenge, but his tactical mind told him this had to be a trap. How could one human penetrate their most secure installation and take control of their equipment without triggering any alarms? The fortress sensors showed no signs of intrusion, no energy signatures that indicated an attack, but as dawn approached, the impossible became undeniable. Every single automated defense system in the fortress had been reprogrammed. During the night, while the rebels slept, the weapons that were supposed to protect them had been turned around. Instead of pointing outward at potential enemies, they were all aimed inward at the Zephyrian positions. The energy barriers that should have kept intruders out were now trapping the rebels inside. The motion sensors that should have detected approaching enemies were sending signals that spelled out messages in ancient Earth script. The communication arrays were broadcasting a single repeating transmission. Your technology serves those who truly understand it. Kolthak realized that his enemy had not just penetrated their defenses. The human had demonstrated complete mastery over systems that the Zephyrians themselves had built. This was not just a military defeat, it was proof that their entire understanding of warfare was fundamentally flawed. As the sun rose over the jungle canopy, War Chief Kolthak walked out of his fortress to face the enemy who had systematically destroyed his forces without firing a single shot. In the clearing before the stronghold, a small figure waited calmly. Han's black clothing made him look like a shadow that had taken human form, but his presence filled the entire space. Kolthak was 9 feet tall, with natural armor that could stop energy blasts and claws that could tear through metal. But for the first time in his life, the massive warrior felt small. This enemy had proven that size and strength meant nothing against true understanding. How? The war chief asked, his voice carrying both respect and the weight of absolute defeat. How? Did you penetrate our most secure installation? How did you take control of our own weapons without triggering any defenses? Han's answer was given in a voice so quiet that Kolthik had to strain to hear it, but every word carried the weight of ancient wisdom. You built defenses against the kind of warfare you understood. But true strength comes not from the tools you use, but from the mind that guides them. Your people evolved beyond the need to adapt. Humans never did. The surrender was immediate and complete. Kolthak laid down his weapons and signaled for his remaining forces to do the same. They had been defeated not by superior firepower but by superior understanding. The human had proven that technology was only as powerful as the wisdom that controlled it, but the impact of Han's victory went far beyond the jungle moon. Throughout the galactic fleet, word spread of what had happened. The mocking laughter that had filled the council chambers months earlier was replaced by stunned silence, and among the wiser commanders a desperate desire to learn. Captain Relvik found himself studying recordings of human training methods, trying to understand how Earth soldiers developed such incredible abilities. Lieutenant Grixon, who had been so proud of his natural invisibility, realized that true stealth was about much more than just becoming unseen tactical officer. Namara began reading everything she could find about human military philosophy. The galaxy had learned a lesson that would change how they thought about warfare forever. Evolution that abandoned basic principles in favor of advanced technology did not create strength, it created weakness. Civilizations that forgot how to adapt and think flexibly were vulnerable to enemies who had never stopped developing those skills. Earth, the backward little world that still trained warriors in ancient arts, had produced a soldier who could turn any environment into his ally and any technology into his tool. The humans, who fought like shadows and thought like flowing water, had proven that the most advanced weapon in any battle was a properly trained mind that refused to accept limitations. When Han finally signaled for extraction, he left behind more than just a defeated enemy army. He left behind a new understanding of what it meant to be truly evolved. The galaxy would never again make the mistake of underestimating humans, who had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of war. The aliens had expected to watch a primitive soldier fail against superior technology. Instead, they witnessed a demonstration of why humans had survived and thrived on a dangerous world while other species had grown soft behind the protection of their machines. The message was clear: technology could enhance a warrior, but it could never replace the fundamental skills that made someone truly dangerous. Intelligence could build better weapons, but wisdom knew when not to depend on them. Evolution meant becoming better at solving problems, not just building more complex solutions. As Han's transport ship left the jungle moon behind, the galactic commanders were already sending new requests to Earth. They no longer wanted to test human soldiers, they wanted to learn from them. The galaxy had discovered that in their rush to become more advanced, they had forgotten some of the most important lessons about survival. And in the mountains of Korea, Master Kim smiled as he felt the morning mist rising from the valley. He had known this day would come when the galaxy would finally understand what his students were truly capable of accomplishing. The ancient ways had proven their worth once again, and the universe was a little bit wiser for the lesson. The humans, who had been mocked for their primitive methods, had taught the galaxy that some things never became obsolete: patience, observation, adaptation, and the will to become one with any environment. These were abilities that no amount of technology could replace. They were the gifts that Earth offered to the stars, and the galaxy was finally ready